Okay, good. So shalom, everybody. Good morning. I'm happy to be with you all again. The topic, of course, I'll just say one thing. Anyone who is okay with opening his or her camera, I would appreciate it because it's, I feel more comfortable talking with people than with black boxes with a name in the middle. But of course, anyone should do whatever one is comfortable with. Okay, good. So I wanted to speak today about the, something happened last week. I'm referring specifically to the author Chaim Walder's suicide and what was preceding it, what was beforehand. It rose up again the questions of, you've seen different rabbis speaking with different voices. Personally, yeah, I'm not neutral. I'm not from the UN here, even though I'll present several approaches, but I have a very, very strong opinion here. And I think that some rabbis there were, in my eyes, okay, I'm expressing my opinion. I'll try to support it during this year. Some rabbis are worthy of praise. Some rabbis, I was very hurt and sad from what they said publicly as a reaction to these matters. I am optimistic. I think that we've gone a long way in the religious community and that we, unfortunately, there's still way to go, but we're definitely progressing if I compare it to our situation years ago. So the topic is, I'll now speak about, Lashon Hara and the limits of Isser Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is an important Isser, a very important Isser. The Chafetz Chaim wrote an entire book about Lashon Hara, seeing it as a very, very important thing. On the other hand, there are limits to this Isser, and I think part of the dispute and the controversy about the last topics was exactly that. What are the limits of Lashon Hara Isser, if there are at all limits, or we take Lashon Hara as an absolute value and we sacrifice other very, very, very important values, in my eyes, sometimes values that are outweighing this value. So let's explore a little bit the topic. I'll start, though, my discussion with an interesting flyer. I'll share with you in the screen a flyer that was distributed on Friday, I believe, at the end of last week in some neighborhoods. And I want you to see the catch in that flyer. Just I'll prepare it for sharing in 1 second. Yeah, okay. After I made these preparations, let's see. Yeah, I'll share with you the screen. This is a photo of this flyer. I hope everyone sees it. It says here in Hebrew, Kulanu ma'aminim lenifga'ot velenifga'im. Okay, so far so good. 1 second here, I'll do it big again. And then look, it's a picture. It's a very strong flyer because it's very visual. It's a picture of a young girl, I guess, with an adult shutting her mouth. An adult shutting her mouth, and he has a bracelet. This adult, with that hand that he's shutting her mouth, as you see, there's written there something. Anyone is able to read what's written? No, like Gush Katif, etc. So are you able to see what's written on the, here, wait a minute. Are you able to see what's written here?
לא מדבר אליי לשון הרע.
לשון הרע לא מדבר אליי. Exactly. Now, Lashon
Could
hara.
could you explain what's up top and what's on the sleeve? Because I don't understand the Hebrew at all, Rabbi.
Okay, okay, I will explain, of course. Thank you for asking. There was a flyer there, okay? There was a flyer there. In the flyer, you see, you know what, here, I'll share this screen again. That way people will be able to see what I'm talking about. There is a flyer there. In the flyer, there is a picture of a young girl. Apparently an adult is covering her mouth, like shutting her mouth. And on the bracelet, it's written, Lashon hara lo medaber elai.
But what does it say on top?
On top, it says, we all believe, I said it in the beginning, I'll repeat it, b'simcha, we all believe the people that were offended, were hurt, victims. We believe the victims. We believe the female and male victims, okay? That's the headline, okay? That's what's written on top. Kulanu ma'aminim lanifgaim velanifkaot. We all believe the people, the people that were injured, both females and males.
The charges that they brought.
What?
Well, their side of what happened, the charges that they brought.
Right, exactly. We all believe them. And then there is, what the flyer shows is there is a girl there that an adult is shutting her mouth. And on the bracelet, it's written, Lashon hara lo medaber elai. Now, what is Lashon hara lo medaber elai? Lashon hara doesn't speak to me. That's a campaign that is done already years on bumper stickers and on bracelets. And that's a big, a very positive educational thing, that a campaign against Lashon hara. People are saying Lashon hara doesn't speak to me. Now here, what the person who did.
Excuse me, it's a play on words, though. For those who don't understand Hebrew, lo medaber elai, it means I don't like Lashon hara. I mean,
right.
It's a play on words, so you have to lo medaber elai.
Lashon hara doesn't talk to me, meaning it doesn't appeal to me. Yeah, doesn't appeal to me. I'm not. But what I'm focusing on here, okay, if you allow me, is actually the designer of this flyer. The message that he or she wanted to deliver is that under the umbrella, in the name of this very holy value of Lashon hara, it is really abused, this high value, because it is serving an adult in that flyer to shut the mouth of the victims, meaning we're shutting the cry, we're shutting the mouth of the victims via abusing the value of Lashon hara. In the name of the Lashon hara, we're actually preventing victims from crying their cry, saying their complaints, etc. That's the message of the person who designed this flyer. And I thought, starting with it, because sometimes a picture is worth more than many, many words. And this is really the core of the discussion of us today. What are the limits, if there are at all, to the Isser of Lashon hara? So let's start looking at our source sheet. Okay, just excuse me, one little second here. Bear with me. Yeah, okay, so there we go. Here, I'll share with you the screen. Great, okay, let's go. All right, so the limits of Isser Lashon hara. So we'll start, one of the famous sources about Lashon hara, one of the famous stories about Lashon hara, is the story about Miriam and Aaron at the end of Parshat Bahalotcha, speaking about Moshe, about the wife he took. As we all know, Miriam was punished with a punishment of tsaras due to her taking part in this or leading this. So Okay, Rashi says that she started it. That's why she is mentioned first and punished. I'm not translating all the source. Yeah. Miriam was next to Tzipporah when Moshe was told that the two prophets, Eldad and Medad, were prophesying in the camp. Kivan sheshama Tzipporah, once Tzipporah heard, Amra, she said, Oy lenashotehen shel ele im nizkakim lenevuah, shiu porshin minashotehen kederech sheperesh ba'ali mimeni. He says, wow, poor are the wives of these prophets, because that means that their husbands will separate from them, just like my husband Moshe separated from me. From them, Misham yada Miriam v'yigid al Aaron. This was the source of knowledge of Miriam, that Moshe wasn't having any intimate relations with Tzipporah, his wife, and she heard that. She was shocked. She probably thought it's wrong. V'yigid al Aaron, and she told Aaron. And now, and this is our last part, Uma Miriam, Shalonit kavna lignuto, kach ne'ensha, kal v'chomer lemsaper begnuto shel chavro. And Miriam didn't mean to speak bad about Moshe, and still she was punished. Kal v'chomer is someone who is intentionally speaking bad things about his fellow man. Okay, that's just an example for the severity of Isur Lashon Hara, that even if someone is saying Lashon Hara without, first of all, saying a true fact. Lashon Hara is an Isur even when it's a true fact. And doesn't even mean necessarily to say a negative thing about his fellow Jew. It's still a problem. So Kal v'chomer if someone has an intention to say evil about someone else. The Gemara in Yoma says, we'll clarify soon some of the Gedarim, some of the definitions of Isser Lashon Hara. Okay. Minayin la'omer davar l'chavero. That's a Gemara in the beginning of Masechet Yoma. Minayin la'omer davar l'chavero shuba ba'al Yomar ad sheyomar lo lech emor shenemar v'yidaber Hashem elav me'ol moed lemor. Okay. This is something that is not included in Isser Lashon Hara, I have to tell you. It's not included in Isser Lashon Hara, and yet still, it's a very, very interesting Isser. That is the, I would say, okay, let me digress for a second. Okay, I'll stop sharing and explain a little background. I once gave a shiur I gave it several times in series that I gave in medical ethics. I did a medical ethics series, both on Memphis, Tennessee, already 13 years ago, together with doctors, and I did the same in Ramot 2-3 years ago. Each year was together with a doctor. It's a very nice series about medical ethics, halacha and refuah. It's not exactly the same, but I'm saying both things. And one shiur that I really like is about professional confidentiality. This is a shiur that has to do with my profession too. As some of you know, I'm a clinical psychologist, a certified clinical psychologist. Actually, I'm giving you now the shiur from the office from my office where I'm the clinical director of 6 outpatient clinics. So I'm very much into this career too, aside from being a community rabbi. And of course, both as a rabbi and as a clinical psychologist, we have the concept of professional confidentiality. Now, interestingly enough, when I reviewed the topic years ago, so I naturally looked at several sources. One of them was the very, very comprehensive and fantastic work of Rabbi Professor Steinberg, the doctor and the rabbi that wrote the medical halachic encyclopedia. It has several volumes. It was translated to English. It is, one might argue that it's a masterpiece. I think that he received Pras Israel for this outstanding work that he did. And yet still, when I read the what he wrote about professional confidentiality, because he has there he has there a long piece about professional confidentiality in refuah and halacha. I was a little disappointed because he analyzed the topic only from the shiur that we're going to now present about lashon hara and lashon hara letoelet. Yeah, the Chafetz Chaim himself, who was so strict with the Isser lashon hara, as we're going to see soon, spoke about the cases where a person must, under limitations and restrictions, say lashon hara when this is a lashon hara letoelet. Okay, good. Now, and of course, he analyzed the topic. When should a therapist, a doctor, break his confidentiality when it's letoelet? The thing is, Paul, the source sheets are shared in the screen. Whenever I read something, I'm sharing it in the screen. Now I'm not sharing it. In a 2 minutes, I'll share it, just as I shared it before. At any rate,
Thanks.
back to our topic. So what I'm saying is that I felt, and not only me, then I saw people that think like me, that as a doctor or as a psychologist, I have an extra obligation, commitment of confidentiality. It's not merely the topic of Isser Lashon Hara Letoelet, because Isser Lashon Hara and the heter to say Lashon Hara Letoelet, meaning for a needed cause, like preventing terrible harm of the third party, okay? These are things that are applying to everybody. Everybody, every human being that a certain knowledge comes to his mind, even if he doesn't have a special relationship with the person. But a therapist, I have a certain covenant, I have a certain agreement, a contract. I have a contract with my patient. That gives me an extra obligation to keep what he tells me confidential. So there is a certain contract. It's not just an ordinary man that has to deal with the Isser of Lashon Hara. True, even an ordinary man has to deal with the Isser of Lashon Hara. But perhaps the limitations that the therapist has, and it makes sense, are even stricter than the limitations that has an ordinary man. Now that has to do, and still, as we know, already the Supreme Court in California in the 70s, I believe, issued the ruling, and we hold by that if a patient tells me that once he goes out of my office, he's going to kill this and this person, and he's dead serious about it, in my impression, I have an obligation to break the confidentiality and warn that person. By the way, there was a minority opinion that claimed that even in this case, the confidentiality shouldn't be broken, saying that then we'll never have therapists of murderers. So from a broad social perspective, that should be. And believe it or not, there was even a rabbi that wrote in a journal in America that supported the minority opinion. He said, well, I believe that went way too far. And I think that we'll still have therapists and people will still give trust in therapists, even in if those very, very extreme cases, the confidentiality will be broken. And therefore the confidentiality in these cases should be broken. By the way, professionally, I won't do it behind the back of the patient. I will inform him, look, the minute you step out of this office, I'm going to tell the police, or I'm going to warn the victim, and we're going to discuss it. We'll have a professional discussion about it. Many times that will prevent the whole Misa. But that's a different story. All this was an intro to the next source that is not exactly talking about Lashon Hara, but more about keeping a secret. If someone tells you something, you have a certain obligation, even if you're an ordinary man, kal v'chomer, if you're a professional with a special contract with him about the matter, to keep it between you and him. Let's see the Gemara in Yoma. Minayin le'omer davar lechavero shehu bebal yomar ad sheyomar lo lechamor. How do I know that if someone tells me something personal, I'm not allowed to share it with other people unless he gives me a permission? And they learn it from a verse by Daber Hashem elav me'ol moed lemor. Hashem spoke to Moses from the tent of meeting, Aimor. Meaning you need that Hashem will tell him, this is for publishing. This is for public knowledge. That Hashem wouldn't tell him that, then he should keep it with himself. All right, now let's look in the Rambam, some of the definitions of Isra Lashon Hara. As I already implied when we learned the first source about Aaron and Miriam, and we'll see Rab Sherlo points out to it later in a later source. You know what? I'll stop here for a second, and I'll ask. I'll share soon the source sheet, but I want to ask. But probably there's some lawyers here in the crowd, and even if not, some people with general knowledge. Yeah, as you know, there is an Isser Diba Lashon Hara also in in Medinat Israel. Let's say if I'm talking about the secular law in Medinat Israel, meaning if someone publishes about me, Avi Kannai, that I did a terrible thing, then if I could sue him, and at certain extreme cases, I'll win. I'll give an example. If you remember, there was a big issue when Rab Seren Reish, a certain Givati commander, Ilana Dayan, did a whole television program. There was a case in the border of Gaza, or in Gaza, where a young girl was killed because she was, it seemed that she's a danger to the military place where they were. And a certain general from, not commander, officer from Givati was sued. And Ilana Dayan made a whole television uvda tochnit about it, kind of convicting him. He sued her for Lashon Hara. He won in the Mechozi, in the Beit Mishpat Mechozi, and then the Supreme Court defended Ilana Dayan. They turned the psika. Yeah, the judge that convicted Ilana Dayan in Lashon Hara was Kvod Shofet Solberg, who's now a Supreme Court judge. He convicted while he was in the lower, because he claimed that Ilana Dayan didn't check enough, and she published things that were lies, and were proven later to be lies. The Supreme Court, in a very acrobatic, in my eyes, okay, that's already interpretation, pretty acrobatic, in my eyes, strategy, said that Ilana Dayan published what seemed to be the truth at that time. And that is enough, so that she won't be convicted. I won't say my opinion about that case and whether, but I want to ask, can a person sue for Lashon Hara in our legal system? I mean, not the, when you say our, it's a little tricky. I mean, in the regular courts of Medinat Israel, the secular courts, can a person sue for Lashon Hara if the publication was true? All the facts that were proven to be true. Let's say a journalist published something very not nice about me, but he has support to it. He could prove that every word that he published is true. Bad things about me. and every word is true. Am I able to sue him?
Well, isn't there a concept of malicious intent, possibly, that there's a legal construct done maliciously, then one might be able to have a claim?
Maybe, but what I want to say, okay, Harold, is that one of the known legal defenses in our regular court system is emet dibarti, haganat emet dibarti, meaning what I published was true. Now, haganat emet dibarti, the defense of I published the truth, if we speak about the halacha of Lashon Hara, not the secular system, but the halacha of Lashon Hara, it is not a valid defense, because Isur Lashon Hara is, and that's the big chiddush of Judaism. Isur Lashon Hara, as Rab Sherla points out, Isur Lashon Hara is even when the data is true. If there is no point in this gossip, there is no toilet, extreme toilet in it, you're not supposed to speak bad things about a person, even if it's true. Okay? So that is a big, that is a fundamental chidush of Judaism here. Now let's look at the Gedarim, at the definitions of Lashon Hara, Rechilot, that the Rambam outlines. Hameragel b'chavero. Yeah, that's Rambam, Hilchot Deot, Perek Zayin. Hameragel b'chavero. One who is speaking, bad about another person, over below ta'aseh, then he violates a negative command. Shneimar lo telech rachel be'amecha. Even though you don't get lashes regarding this matter, it is a big sin. Avon gadolhu v'gorem laharog nefashot rabot mi'Israel. It is causing the many people of Israel to be killed, and that is why there is a juxtaposition to the pasuk Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Look, the Rambam points out to the fact that in the same verse, two clauses are attached. Lo telech rachil be'amecha, don't gossip about your fellow man. Lo telech rachil be'amecha. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, don't stand by, don't be a bystander on the blood of your fellow Jew. These two clauses were juxtaposed. Okay? And Rambam learned something from that juxtaposition. He says, once who is gossiping is actually causing that many Jews will be killed because of that. Keep in mind this juxtaposition, because we'll see a different interpretation than the Rambam's for that juxtaposition. Okay, now the Rambam defines what is rechilus. Ezehu rachil. What is rechilus? Gossiping. Zeh shetoin dvarim v'olech mizel hazeh v'omer kach amar ploni, kach shamati al ploni, af al pi shehu emet. Harei zeh machriv et haolam. One who goes and talks from this person to this person and says, this is what this Jew said, this is what he said, this is what I heard about this guy. He says, even if everything is true, as I pointed out, he is destroying the world. Yesh avon gadol mizeh ad me'od. He says there is a greater sin from this. And this is Lashon Hara. And this, if he says something that is negative about his fellow man, even though it's the truth. So look at that. There's a hierarchy here. Rechilus, it's even if it's true, and even if it's not a negative thing, this is a destruction of the world. A greater sin, even if it's true, but you're telling a negative thing. Avala omer sheker, now the Rambam goes to the next level. If he's tachlis saying lies about a person, nikra motzi shemra al chaveru. This is a motzi shemra. So we have here three layers. stam gossiping, which is very negative in Rambam's eyes. Gossiping while I'm saying negative things. All this still true. And then there is a motzi shemra. That's someone who is mamash telling lies about someone else. Aval omer sheker. Nikra motzi shemra al chaveru. Aval bal hashonora. Desh yoshev omer kach v'kach asa ploni. V'kach v'kach hayu avotav. V'kach v'kach shamati alav v'amar dvarim shel Kannai. Lashonara is saying truth, but he's saying bad things. And regarding him, there is a strong pasuk. Hikaret Hashem kol siftei chalakot v'chulei. A very negative verse. Now the Rambam goes on. Yesh dvarim shen avak lashon hara. That's the dust of lashon hara. Like what? Keitzad mi omar leploni sheyeh kmot shu ata, o sheomar shitku miploni eini rotze lodia ma'ira. Someone is like, don't ask me what happened with this guy. Okay, he didn't say anything, but he said something, right? That's the dust of lashon hara. He didn't say anything, but he said, don't ask what happened with this and this guy. That's avak lashon. Next halacha, im nemru dvarim elu. If these kind of things were said, bifnei shlosha, in front of three people, a quorum of three people, kvar nishma davar venoda. So that's already considered as if it was published, public knowledge. And if one of these three told it sometime else, there is no lashon hara here. Rambam here says a very, very big leniency regarding lashon hara. Something was printed already in the newspaper. There is no lashon hara anymore because it's already public knowledge. But there is a stipulation here. It's only if his intention doesn't have an intention to spread it more. So there are many, many cases, especially in our modern era, that when I'm telling something that is already public knowledge, I'm not doing it with any intention of spreading it more, to further spread it. As long as this is okay, Rambam says it's okay. All right, so we've seen the basic definitions of lashon hara in Maimonides and the Rambam. Now, as I told you, Rambam, in his opening remarks, said that why is there a juxtaposition in the Torah between Isser lashon hara and Isser rechilus, lo telech rachil ba'amecha, and Isser lo tamod al dam re'echa, don't stand by the blood that is spilled by your fellow man, of your fellow man. So he said it's because it's a cause and effect. By saying rechilus, you're causing destruction in the world, and you're really bystanding on, you're causing bloodshed. Can anyone think here about a different reason why these two clauses were juxtaposed? I'll give you a hint. Juxtaposed. I'll give you a hint. Maimonides thinks that they're going in the same direction. It's a cause and effect. Yeah, if you are saying lashon hara, then you cause that blood will be spilled. Can I think of a different kind of relationship between the two clauses?
Well, if you speak lashon hara, it's possible that a third party may then act against the individual who about whom the gospel was said.
So, Harold, I see what you said as a kind of elaboration of what Maimonides said, because it still works in the same direction, that one is an outcome of the other. Okay?
What about the idea of a person, a doctor who, like you said before, a doctor who knows that the person that he's treating is capable of killing, and the patient specifically says to the doctor, you know, I hate that guy so much, I could kill him. So I would expect that would be an exception to the rule of lashon hara, because he said it lo tamod al dam re'echa.
Fantastic, Donnie. So you understand that the reason why the Torah brought these two clauses together was that the first clause was lo telech rachil ba'amecha, and then the second clause is in the same verse, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, the role of the second clause is to limit the first clause.
Right.
Very good. So that's a total different direction than Maimonides. Okay. It is seeing a certain tension between the two clauses, yeah, of a Lashon Hara. Just like the flyer that I opened my Shiur with, yeah, that Lashon Hara, being too strict with Lashon Hara will be, could be detrimental in terms of lo tamod al dam re'echa. Right, and here I want to show you, with your permission, how Rav Sherlo, applying this to the Chaim Wilder thing, says exactly what Donnie said. I'm reading it. Rabbi Sherlo. Lo lechinam, it is katva Torah boto pasuk atzmo lo telech rachel b'amecha v'lo tamud al dam re'echa. It's not a coincidence that the Torah wrote in the same verse lo telech rachel b'amecha and lo tamud al dam re'echa. Sheken shnei chelkei pasuk sotrim mibchina ma'asit. The two parts of the pasuk are practically many times contradicting each other. Practically. Isur lo telech rachel. The Isra of not gossiping, is commanding us not to spread bad, information, negative information about human beings. Our big message, halachic message to the universal culture is that this Isra is applying even when the information is true. So that's from one hand. On the other hand, the Isra of do not be a bystander when there is a risk that your fellow man is about to be killed or damaged. This Isra is prohibiting a person to be quiet. And to ignore, it is prohibited to ignore the fact that there is a wrong that was done here, that they're nifgaot v'nifkaim, that they're victims. Rather, it is commanding us to go ahead and protect them. The protection requires dealing with their bad deeds. And the problem is even more complicated because the real question, whether indeed there are victims here, is still a suffix before things were clarified. Whereas harming his good name of the offender could be immediate and without any doubt, and will be very, very hard to fix it. So it's so complicated. Many times you need to warn, even when it's not clear. But if it's not clear, you already did the damage to the offender. And then what happens if it turns out to be a fabrication? Therefore, the situation is complex many times. Dinei Lashon Hara, says Rav Sherlo, the laws of Lashon Hara for Toelet that are outlined in the Chafetz Chaim book, they are netzvim et hakivun v'et hamatzpen. They're showing, they're paving us the direction and the conscience here. לעולם קודמת האחריות לנפגעים ולנפגעות מטובתו של הפוגע. And this is a very important sentence that unfortunately I think some significant rabbis forgot it. But Baruch Hashem, some significant rabbis remembered it. Le'olam, says Rav Sherlo, based on the Chafetz Chaim, Le'olam, forever, the responsibility to the victims is higher in the hierarchy from the good of the offender. Zehu yesod hayesodot. This is the foundation of foundations. Umitoch kach yesh derech la'asot zot. And out of this principle, there is a way to do it. That again, the Chafetz Chaim paved the way, and I'll show it. Lechaven l'shem shamayim u'lebakashat haemet. You should really have l'shem shamayim intention and only the truth. Ledayek b'ma sheyadua u'b'ma shelo yadua. You should be very accurate and say what is known and what is still not known. לפתוח את כל השערים המאפשרים את בירור העניין, to open all the gates that are enabling to clarify the matter. לא להטות את הדברים, לא לצד זה ולא לצד אחר, not to try to be as objective as possible. להקפיד להבחין בין עובדות ובין פרשנות, to be מקפיד, to distinguish between facts and interpretations. ובעיקר, and mostly, says Rav Sherlo, to remember always, לזכור תמיד, כי לא מדובר בעולמה של תורה על זכות הציבור לדעת, in the world of Torah, we're not talking about the right of the tzibur to know, the public's right to know. מדובר בעולמה של תורה על חובת הציבור לדעת. We're talking about the obligation of the public to know. If there is a danger, it's an obligation that the tzibur, the public, will know. And these things that חובה לציבור לדעת, אותם דברים שחובה לציבור לדעת, that it's obligatory that the public will know, חובה לפרסם. You have an obligation to publish, not less than it and not more than it. So this Rav Sherla wrote about a week ago as just general and a general outline, the parameters of how we work. And as you see, what he used here at the opening of his is exactly how Donnie explained the tension between these two clauses. On the one hand, lo telech rachil ba'amecha, but lo telech rachil ba'amecha is not an absolute value, as the Chafetz Chaim already taught us. Sometimes there are limits to this Isser, and it's unfortunate that some, I believe, rabbis, Baruch Hashem, not the majority of them, forgot this thing in the past weeks. Let's see. I want to go back, with your permission. Let's look at some cases that are known. The Chelkas Yaakov, that's a responsa. He was asked, Sheila, lebachur yesh machalat sartan. We know a guy that is in Shidduchim now, that he has cancer. The prognosis, according to the experts, is that his lifespan is no more than a year or two. Now, this is a very rare case, so it's really theoretical. The person himself, which is weird, I don't believe that it would have happened today. The person himself and his family are not aware of the disease, of the illness, and he became engaged. Does the doctor have an obligation to reveal this to the Kala if it's known that the Kala will not marry him? Tshuva, he's obligated to tell it to the Kala, and the argument is lo ta'amod al dam recha. Now look, it's a weird question, how I see reviewing it again. This is an old, because of course, everyone will understand that the first step is to tell it to the patient himself. They're asking about telling the Kala. What do you mean that the patient here doesn't know? You should try to convince, tell the patient, convince him to tell the Kala. Perhaps if he's not willing, then it's a big, big dilemma. The Igros Moshe, look at how the Igros Moshe is careful when he treats students. Meaning, that's a very, very common case in schools, or was at least. The Malamed is telling the students, anyone who knows who did this thing, you need to inform me. Says, don't do that. This is teaching them to say Lashon Hara. So the Igros Moshe said, I prefer that the teacher won't find out who did the bad thing. Again, of course, I think it's very contextual. It depends. What is the bad thing? But he says, in general, I don't want to encourage kids to be gossipers and to be moisrim, etc. Let's see how Rav Ovadia treats the limits of Lashon Hara.
Let me ask, wouldn't it be reasonable to expect that the Malamed would get up in class and say, before he does what we're saying he should not do, he should get up and say, listen, we have this problem, and I expect the person who did this to admit it.
Right. Donnie, this is exactly what Rav Moshe would praise in that tshuva. Rav Moshe there, as you've seen, I brought a little quote of a sentence of a row and a half. He specifically is against a Malamed saying, anyone who knows who did it, I ask him to tell me. Okay, that is what he was opposing. Okay, He was definitely Rav Moshe, as an educator, was definitely for, an educated standing in front of the classroom and saying, this is a terrible thing that happened here. I expect and ask the person who did it to come privately and tell me that he did it, and we'll deal with it, okay? Rav Moshe didn't speak about that. He spoke about not encouraging others to give his name.
Moser.
Bediuk. This is exactly what Rav Moshe was very reserved. And you have to understand that this is a thing that was done in Chadarim. And he goes against it. In the tshuva of the Yechavedat here of Rav Ovadia says the following: Lefichach benidon shelanu, hayodeh she'aish hamvakeshet rishyon nehiga. Let's say there is a doctor who knows that someone is asking for a license, and he knows that he is uchole b'machala smuya. He is ill in a very covered illness. That one cannot find in a routine check, like epilepsy. He is obligated to inform immediately Misrad Harishui so that people won't be killed. Here is a classic example that Rav Ovadia claims that if a doctor knows that there is a person that has a license and he knows for sure that he has epilepsy, and he knows that this guy was able to fool somehow the routine test done by Misrad Harishui, by the authorities in Israel that give the license, he has an obligation because it's a matter of life and death. This guy could perhaps kill people while he's driving. So here he's obligated to warn the Misrad Harishui, the authorities in Israel. Now, okay, I wanna, if you'll excuse me, I'm skipping the next source, even though it's an important source, but I look at the time and I wanna read the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim that Rav Sherlo beforehand said that he is the one that actually gave us the direction how to deal with, let's say, and I'll tell you, I'll just for a second, of course, there is a big issue about what are the relationships between the Isra of Lashon Hara on the one hand. I mentioned beforehand Ilana Dayan and the case of the Givati officer. So the relationships between Isra Lashon Hara on the one hand and freedom of speech and open journalism that is so prominent in the modern era. There's definitely a tension between these two values. And we as Jews, we're not necessarily cherishing the extremity that the freedom of speech or freedom of knowledge or whatever that is in the modern and postmodern world. That is not necessarily adhering to our Jewish values, meaning that someone went out of the balance, perhaps. Having said that, we cannot ignore, and as you've seen, Rav Sherlo mentioned Lo Ta'amod al Dam Re'echa exactly in that context. The famous statement by Judge Brandeis in America about the light of the sun as, what was the quote? No, it's a very, very known quote. The problem is that I know the translation to Hebrew. It's absurd. It was said originally in English, so I was expecting that one of you know the original quote in English. I'll say it in Hebrew. Or hashemesh hamechateh, the light of the sun that is disinfecting. Okay, Judge Brandeis caught here a very, very deep truth. That when things are covered, where things are done in a shtibel culture, they're covered, they're not public, they're not exposed, then that gives a lot of room for corruption and unfortunately also for abuse. Yeah, the covering is, the uncovering and bringing it to the light of the sun is disinfecting. is sterilizing, is disinfecting.
Does
Mechateh.
that mean that in his idea that the tzibur is more important than the yachid?
I don't think so. I don't think that Judge Brandeis meant that, okay? He just said, and remember the time that he said it. Yeah, it's not now. It's decades ago. He just pointed to the true fact, and we know it. Judge Brandeis pointed to the true fact. We have to say here honestly that when things are done in coverage, there is no shkifut, there's no transparency. Organizations that lack transparency, that gives rise to corruption and sometimes to even more terrible things, okay? When there is a lack of transparency. Transparency is disinfecting in many, many cases. However, maybe we went a little too far in that okay, well, the question is, we are sensitive also. I assume Judge Brandeis was also sensitive, but perhaps our Jewish tradition is even more sensitive to the right of a person to his good name, okay? Not harming his good name, etc. Now the question is, how do we balance between the two? Now let's see what the Chafetz Chaim writes about Lashon Hara Letoelis, what we call Lashon Hara, under what circumstances, and we all know how the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Narodin, was careful about the issue of Lashon Hara, and yet still, he himself said that there are exceptions. Based on these exceptions, we saw some of the previous rulings here, like the ruling of Rav Ovadia, that a doctor that knows that someone is that someone is driving now and he's dangerous, he has an obligation to warn the authorities, and by that save lives. If one saw a fellow Jew doing harm to another Jew, like Kegon Shegazlo, Ashako, Eziko, he robbed him, he stole from him, he damaged him, Oshebisho, Shetziaro, he embarrassed him, Onauto Bedvarim, yeah, he turned down on him, and he knows for sure that this damager didn't return what he stole, didn't pay the damage, lo shilem et nisko, lo bikesh panav limchol olavano, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't take responsibility. Afilu ra'a davar ze levado, even if he saw this thing alone, and by the way, that is a l'chora against the Gemara that we've seen before, but only l'chora, because there it said, oh, if you're only one witness, then you're stam saying Lashon Hara. Well, it depends. It is only, Rav Chafetz Chaim limits the previous Gemara. He says, even if you saw it alone, but if there's a damage here, and there is a danger that this guy will continue to damage, that's a different case. So let's go on. He is allowed to tell this to other people, even if he saw it only by himself. And that means that in court, in Dinei Torah, it could not be proven because there are no two witnesses here. Yet still, he saw clearly a damage that Shimon did to Levi. Reuven saw clearly a damage that Shimon did to Levi. He is allowed to tell it to other people in order to help Levi to get what he needs.
Does that mean he can do it publicly? Or does that mean he has to do it for each individual?
No, he needs to tell people. No, he doesn't go into that detail, but he says that
It's important. Isn't it an important distinction?
He's allowed to tell people in what needs to enable, to help the person get what he deserves. And by the way, look at that. It's very important. It's not only warning from future damage. It is, let's say there is even no danger in the future, but there is someone that was harmed and the other guy, the offender, didn't take responsibility and didn't ask Mechila. He is allowed to say it to people so that Mechila will be asked. But look, he's a hair. Here are the outline. He should be careful. That these 7 conditions will be met. Look, it's 7 conditions, not that simple conditions. Let's read them. Shir'eh davar be'atzmo. He should see it by himself. V'shelo yada al yedei shmi'ah me'acherim. That it's not that he heard it from other people, that he saw it. Ve'im shama me'acherim, but here that's important. And if he did only hear it from other people, im nitbarer lo achar kach she'adavar emet. Now, of course, here there's a big, if it was clarified to him that it's true. Now the question is, what does it mean clarifying? What level of proof do you need? Here the Chafetz Chaim is a little ambiguous. We'll get to that. Shizaher me'od shelo yachlit techef sha'aish gazal ve'ashak o izik rak yitbonen heitev b'inyan. Meaning he should be very careful before judging and jumping to conclusions that indeed this person stole or damaged. Sheyochiach et achoteh mitchila b'lashon raka. He should first rebuke the sinner, ulai yuchal le'o'ilo, softly. Maybe by that, he will turn him back to the good way. If you won't listen to him, only then he should yodi al arabim. You see, he should tell the people the guilt of that person. Only if it refused to listen to the rebuke. Shelo yagdil ha'avla yoter mima shehi. You should not magnify the wrong, meaning don't exaggerate. When you tell the public, tell exactly what you know and don't magnify it. Don't exaggerate. You should have an intention for a toelet and not chas v'shalom to benefit from the damage that you return to chavero. And don't publish it because you have a sinna, an ancient sinna to that party that you're telling now the bad things about. This is only if you don't have any other choice to cause this person to fix the damage. If you have another way to cause the person to fix the damage, then you're not allowed to tell him. If you have an alternative way. Don't, you have to evaluate that the destruction will not be bigger by telling it than by not telling it. Then he concludes, now he says, when I'm allowed, this is when you know for sure about something. What about if you have only a suspicion, which is in many, many cases, it's a suffix still, but there is a chashad, we're suspecting that there is a problem. So here, these are the...
Based on what can he have a chashad?
Okay, so here he says, Lefi havanat mesaper, yesh b'dvarim kedei levases et hachashad. First of all, that there's ground for this suspicion, meaning that you did a chakira and okay, you can't mamish convict the guy, but there is a big basis for this, or there is a basis to this chashad. B, shelo yeyaches mesaper la'adam hara'a gdola. Again, not exaggerate, to say very accurately what is the chashad and not more. And then, of course, all the 7 limitations that were said before. So first of all, what we see here clearly that there are holy Chafetz Chaim was so much associated with being strict about the Isra of Lashon Hara, definitely gave us here criteria when we are allowed, and as Rav Sherla said, not only allowed, are obligated to say the Lashon Hara, okay? Now, if you ask me personally, all of these conditions were far met in the case of Rav Shmuel Eliyahu. All of the conditions, just review all of them. Not only that they were all met, as I showed you, it's even more so. It's a Kal V'chomer. The Chafetz Chaim spoke about a case when there's perhaps even no future potential risk. It's only about fixing. Okay, fixing something that was done in the past. Kal v'chomer, when there is a need to warn the public. That is a certain answer to what I found in the words of Rabbi Tau, who was extremely disappointed by his, disappointed is an understatement. I could say harsher. I think that Okay, I don't want to say, I think that what was done was a big chilul Hashem, what was recorded by Rav Tau, and even his letter of explanation later, which I'm quoting from now, I think is a terrible, terrible thing. I think it's corrupt morally. It's moral evilness. And when he says, well, he already committed suicide, then there's no point in further on speaking about it, because there is no warning from the future here. Well, hello. I think we've seen here that that's not the only criteria. Let's just see, based on what we said, I'll share with you. Okay, let's skip here the Psak of Ben Gurion. Okay, here there are some sources that are showing, and I think it's good. Let's read Rabbi Eisenberg. That's an article from 96, not about our case. מקובל לראות במידת ההגנה על הפרט מודד לקדמה של מערכת האוהב. It is generally accepted to see the amount that we defend the individual and his privacy as a certain barometer to the enlightenment of and the progressiveness of a certain law system. Submitting the enslaving the individual for the clause for the publics is something totalitarian. Whatever, I'm now trans. So he says in this manner we're much more advanced. What he wants to say that the Jewish law, for the Jewish law, it's very, very precious to protect the right of a person for his good name by putting such weight on the laws of Lashon Hara. Agreed. And yet still, as we have seen in the Chafetz Chaim, in Rav Sherlo, there are limits to that thing too. So, okay, we already read what Rabbi Sherlo wrote about our case. Let's now read. I want to read something important, a reaction that Rav Aviner did right after Chaim Valder committed suicide. I was very disappointed with what Rav Aviner wrote, extremely. I'm not neutral, I told you to begin with. And let's say at the same day, Rav Sherlo published what I read with you in half an hour ago, and Rav Aviner wrote. I'm not sure Rav Aviner would have written the same now. Perhaps, as he says, he limits what he writes. Let's read what he wrote. Everything that I will write about Chaim Valder is based on our current knowledge about what we know about the facts now. I think that he wasn't updated, as you'll see soon, about what he wrote. Once we'll have new information, perhaps my opinion will be changed. Meaning he is clarifying, as his first point, that whatever he's going to write in the following lines is based on the knowledge that he has, information that he has now. Perhaps in the future he will know more, and then he will change what he writes. But here, my kasha on Rav Aviner, well, part of the information he could have checked by, calling Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu, which apparently clearly from the article he didn't do. So it's not just the chokhmah to say I'm writing based on what I know now. If the information is available now, so write your articles only after you finish to check the information that is available now. Nope, showing that's not my biggest problem with what he writes. Okay, that's very important. A person is in a chazaka that he's a kosher man as long as it wasn't proven the opposite way. What is called in the general laws, in the Chukei Hagoyim, in the laws of the Gentiles, it's called chizkat hachaput. Yeah, and everyone else chizkat hachaput. Yeah, we have a chazaka till I was convicted in court. Till my status is till I was convicted in court. My status is that I'm innocent. Innocent till proven guilty, and not the opposite way around. Lo shu bechezkat rasha. Not that he is that he has a chazaka that he's a rasha, and then he has to prove that he didn't err. No. So there is a chezkat chaput. And now he writes an important line. Soon you'll understand why he writes it. Maybe I'll bold it. Ad ko, says Rav Aviner, lo huchach davar. Till now, nothing was proven in the sense of proof. Yeah? So he says, regarding Walder, look at that. He writes it a day after he committed suicide. Rav Aviner says, nothing was proven yet in court. So he has the chazaka of innocency. How can we prove such a thing, says Rav Aviner? The proof should be done not by social media or the media, rather bebeidin. This should be done only via beidin. How said Drisha v'chakira, only other the strict procedure of Drisha v'chakira of beidin. Klomar chakira adversarit, adversar, benochechut hatzad hasheni, at the presence of the other side. Shamoa bein achechem. That's a quote from Parsha Devarim. Shamoa bein achechem. When someone is suing another person, nothing could be really clarified unless the two parties are present and one is able to cross-examine, cross-investigate the other part. In order to prove that I'm guilty, I should have the tools, the kalim, the means to defend myself. The means to defend myself are only if I see who complained against me, I know who are the complainers, and I'm able that my lawyer will investigate them. Adko, he says, till now, the complaints of ladies regarding Walder, lo nechkaru bebeidin bofen adversary canal, weren't examined and investigated in Beidin by that adversar means. So Rav Aviner said, Chaim Walder committed suicide. There were allegations against him. He was never been able to cross-investigate the complainers. Due to that fact, his guilt was not proven, so he is in the chazaka of innocent. By the way, Rav Aviner concludes from it that one is able to read from his books, as long as this is the legal status. Okay, since I see that we don't have a lot of minutes left, so please allow me to comment on what Rav Aviner here writes. As far as we know, Rav Shmuel Eliyahu at least claims that he invited Chaim Walder, not to face the complainers, but to Beidin and to say his story and to be asked questions. And he refused to come. Okay, well, you can say that's not the point. The point is that Chaim Walder wasn't given the option to have a lawyer and investigate these ladies. Okay, so here is my answer to this. First of all, I admit, or I concede, that the ideal way that a society should let someone defend his good name is by, and that's what we're trying to do in most cases, by giving him the ability to see who complains against him and to cross-examine it and to investigate, and that his lawyer will investigate him. This is indeed true. Furthermore, by preventing this, we are indeed harming the rights of a person to defend himself. I agree. I think that we should be honest, intellectually honest, and say that. Having said that, that's not, sometimes we're not living in an ideal world, and sometimes there are conflicting values in our world. And we know from all our research and all our knowledge that a victim of sexual abuse by someone who had power on her, like in the case of Walder, who was their therapists, etc., and they were yachasei marut, relationships of authority there. We know that if we'll wait till the complainers will go to court or to the police and will be willing that the lawyer of Chaim Wilder will investigate them, and only after a judge will issue a decision, only after that we will be allowed to publish things or to bring to the tzibur the knowledge of things. This is not realistic, and then we will sacrifice the value of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Yeah? So, yes, it's definitely not ideal that we're not giving a man an opportunity to cross-investigate his complainers. But this is exactly, but on the other hand, we can't live in a society where abuses and assaults are done and are not stopped and are not also commended. How do you say, not commend, ginui, how do you say ginui? Condemned.
Condemned. Yeah.
Condemned publicly by the society. That's our obligation to support the victims. So therefore, there were some solutions that we can call a middle solution. As you all know, Forum Takana, the Takana Forum, was established already in 2003, exactly for that. People who are from a variety of sex, people that generally disagree one with the other on every single thing, but united, they're rabbis, they're professionals, they're lawyers, they're in a quiet way, they're accepting complaints of people who either legally can't complain because there's a loophole in the law, or they're not willing yet or not ready yet to complain. They're listening, then they're listening, they're doing a big drisha b'chakira, very careful with the information. They're meeting with the person that the complaint was issued against. They're hearing his story or her story. And then if there is no other choice, they are warning the tzibur. Rav Shmuel Eliyahu, in this last case, did the same. It's not that he heard a rumor. He heard a rumor and then he published something about Chaim Wilder. He listened carefully and examined and investigated a whole list, 22, he says, of complainers. Furthermore, and I'll end with this. The lawyer of Chaim Wilder, Dovi Weinroth, did something that in my eyes is very impressive. In the Levaya, his blood was boiling, and he said that the journalist that published against Chaim Wilder, the journalist in Haaretz, is a murderer, and the people are murderers, and Lashon Hara, and he spoke very strongly, extremely strongly. Dovi Weinroth posted a post 3 days later, still in the Shiva. The headline was Fisfasti Be'anak. I did a terrible miss, a gigantic miss. That involved a lot of courage out of him, and I admire him. And he said, in the past days, I spoke with professionals. I understood what does it mean for a patient to come and complain. I understood what does it mean. I understood how hard it is. I took some courage in my pride and I called the journalist from Haaretz. Actually, I was surprised that he answered me because after what I said about him over the grave, I wouldn't answer, but he answered me, the journalist. And he said, Dovi, I'm not angry at you. You were eulogizing a friend. I can understand this. But Dovi, you have to understand, I never write such articles in Haaretz if I have only one complainer. In this case, I had 15.
Whoa.
Only three were willing that I'll publish their story. Only 3 out of the 15. So I published the story of the 3. So, again, you could say we don't know. It's true. I personally don't know. I wasn't in the Beit Din of Shmuel Eliyahu, and I wasn't in the journalist place. But in terms of probability, and I could only work here with probability, to assume, like what Rav Tau said in this terrible recording, he said about the Katsav case, it's all fabrication, the President Katsav. These three, and then he's asked by a student, were these complainers paid? Yeah, they were paid. To say that all
How does he know that?
were paid, and it's all because Katsav was against meeting reforms, so they did this fabrication. And with Wilder, it's all because he he was fighting the Judge Barak, and because of that, Haaretz made a whole fabrication against him. God bless him. I think it has to do perhaps maybe with my other profession. But Be'emet, I mean, this is terrible. It's a Chilul Hashem. In the article of clarification, he just writes that the Isra of Lashon Hara is so important and that we've gone too far with not keeping Lashon Hara and that and all kinds of these things. He does admit there that there is an obligation to warn when things are known. Okay, I think that we covered the topic. I see the time. And let's hope for better days and that our V'haya Machanecha Kadosh, and that our camp will be clean.
Can I ask a question? I think we touched on it before, but I'm not sure we came to any conclusion. The question is of how he tells and who he tells that he knows something. Meaning, what does that mean? That means that is he allowed to do it by Rabbim, so that anybody who might have a chashash would need that warning to protect themselves, or does he have to do it only to those people who he knows are in a situation that requires his warning?
Okay. So look, I think that here, again, Donnie, we should work with the parameters that the Chafetz Chaim outlined, and let me explain. We are always trying, okay, to be mechaven l'shem shamayim, and to minimize as much as possible the Lashon Hara, because we're not happy violating this thing, okay? That means if there is an effective way, as he said in one of his, like condition number 6, I think it was, or 5, if there is any effective alternative way to achieve the goal, then of course we'll use that alternative. Meaning, if it will be fully effective, not saying it publicly, but only to certain people, then of course that's better. However, sometimes there is no choice than warning the public. Let's say if, I'll give you the cases, Rav Elon's case, where Takana, when Forum Takana published it, the thing was that you don't know which teenager will now come and consult with them. So here you really have no choice. There is no alternative path, okay? So I think these are the parameters.
So it depends on the circumstances.
Absolutely, always. Okay.
Can I just add something to what Danny said, which you mentioned, Rav Kannai, and your wonderful lecture. Really, teachers who suspect that there is abuse at home or violence at home. Now, first of all, the teacher's not trained to deal with this.
Right.
Right, number one. Number two, what is his responsibility? Number three, how does he go about it? And this is a major issue. In the UK, it's become very large, and in Israel, it's growing. That's number one. Number two, I heard something from another rabbi, and I won't mention his name. He said it says Achrei mot kedoshim emor. That's not a halakha, but he said that's it.
Look, Achrei mot.
I was rather shocked.
Okay, I need Paul with your. I apologize. We'll need to wrap it up. I'm just saying.
I know.
First of all, no. I'm just saying Achrei mot kedoshim. That's a very nice word, and it's true many times. If victims are feeling that they're not supported in the name of this Achrei mot kedoshim emor, it's problematic. That's one. Two, now regarding teachers, we won't go into that, that's all, but I assume, and I think I even know, there is a certain protocol that the Ministry of Education teaches in such cases. When you suspect something, you have an obligation, of course, to do something with it. because this is a big time thing. On the other hand, a teacher is not trained, and a teacher should know his place. That's why there is a protocol. He goes to the school psychologist, the school counselor, and they see what they can do. They probably take a professionalist who perhaps takes the kid, asks him some questions, okay? Try to, in a very sensitive way, the revacha, involve the revacha, try to find out what is actually going on and what should be done.
Yeah, and the
that
child is scared. Child is scared.
Of course, that is the professional way to deal with these things. And there is a certain protocol that I hope is done in schools. Okay, חברים, שיהיה לכולם שבת
שלום, בשורות טובות.
בשורות טובות.
בשורות טובות, זה הכי חשוב.
נכון.
יישר כוח, well done. יישר כוח.